loved the first Barnstorm album, and then his second album obviously was great. But that's actually where we first thought of using Kenny when we were, thinking. Elton and I were sitting around at the chateau trying to think who would get. And I suggested Caleb straight away because we'd played together many times. And I thought that would be a good fit. And he knew a lot of the music, well, some of the music before, we became a four-piece, the band. And Roger, being a part of Caleb's band Hookfoot, was also another, it was like, okay, let's get Roger because he'd played on our stuff and we knew him. So, it was a lot of kind of friends were involved at that point. It's ironic that James was the guy that nobody knew. And he and I became instant friends, and we're friends to this day. I kind of got the band together earlier in the year. I took Kenny with me to a place I had in the Dordogne in France where I was just getting away from things and trying to deal with the changeover from having lost Dee and Nigel. And Kenny came down to visit, and Roger Pope did as well at one point. And it was pretty crazy. I had an old farmhouse in the Dordogne. I guess it was around April of 75. And so anyway, we knew who was all going to be part of the band. And so the rest of that year went from doing the Wembley show, the Midsummer Night's Madness, and that was the first gig, and after the rehearsals, and then we played several shows.
The thing about that particular band, it was fairly short-lived, but it was wonderful, extraordinary. James Newton Howard, who was wonderful. He was in Elton's band a bit longer, but this particular band with Roger Pope, Caleb and Kenny was fairly short-lived, but it was an exciting time, I have to say.
For me, it was a change in my life. I was freezing my butt off in Chicago at the time, and I'd bumped into Roger. I'd gone to see them. They played a gig in Chicago. And that's when, after the end of their gig, Roger was packing his drums away, and I went up to say hello. Hey, man, great, And Roger says to me, he says, keep this on the down low. He says, Elton's changing his band. He's getting a new band. I said, what? What are you talking about? He said, yeah. He says, I'm in it, and he wants you in it. I've told him to get you. I said, he said, you'll be getting a call. And I thought, and at first I couldn't believe it. I thought, okay, yeah, sure, he's had a few drinks too many or whatever, And sure enough, comes like around November and winter's settling in Chicago. I'm freezing my tail off, and Elton calls me. He says, I don't know if you've heard, but I'm changing my band, blah, 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 blah. I want you in it. What do you say? I said, just tell me when. And he said, I'm going to fly you out to Scottsdale, Arizona, so we can talk about it. And so when he flew me out there, stayed out there, and we had this conversation. And I'll never forget. He said, this is what I want to do. And he said, we're going to get Kenny. And I'm going, man, this is what in the world, And I said to him, I said, I'll do it. I said, on one condition. He said, what's that? I said that we don't have to play Crocodile Rock. And he said yes. He said yes. So that was it. That's when my life changed.
Really, the story of me joining Elton's band is kind of a cool story. I had been on tour with a woman named Melissa Manchester. I was making like $200 a week. And I was in New York, and I opened up a Rolling Stone magazine or something, and it had this story that Elton John, who was really my hero, musical hero, had broken up his band and wanted to add a keyboard player. And I don't know where I was, and I just thought to myself, wow, can you imagine that job? And 6 months later, I got a call from my manager at the time, asking me if I would be interested in auditioning for Elton's band. And yeah, I would be. Um, and funny thing is, I had been in a band for a couple years called Mama Lion, and and we did a couple of albums, and when there was extra time, I had recorded a solo album, a little album of instrumental music that I had written at the time. And I was going around to different labels with my manager, seeing if I could get a deal. And nobody would give me a deal, of course, because it was not commercial. But this one guy, a guy named Gary Katz, who ended up producing Steely Dan and kind of a pretty successful and cool guy, said, well, you're never going to get a deal here because it's just not, they're not going to buy it, but I think you're really good. Um, just leave me a couple copies because I already made this album. So we left a couple of copies, and then 6 months later, I got the call, and I went to Los Angeles, and my instructions were to drive to the Hamburger Hamlet on Sunset Boulevard in Doheny and look for a purple Rolls Royce, which I did, and I found the Rolls Royce, and I was in this beat up old Volkswagen, and this guy got out of the car, bearded guy, really elegant looking guy. Turned out to be Howard Rose, eventually Elton's agent. And he said, "Are you James Howard?" Yeah. I said, "Follow me." So I followed him way up into the mountains, up into the hills, where these big houses were, mansions. And uh, I was escorted into this palatial kind of living room. And I was sitting there for about 2 minutes, and I was 24, I guess, or 23. And in walks Elton John wearing tennis clothes. And we were both very shy. I could barely talk, and he was very shy. And he played me Captain Fantastic, which hadn't come out yet, which was, you know, one of my favorite albums. And we talked a little bit, and then incredibly, he said, I'll never forget these words. Well, you got the gig if you want it. And I said, I mean, inside I was screaming, of course. I said, yes, I would like that. I didn't play a note for him, nothing. Um, I mean, I was kind of cute then, so it may have had something to do with it. But we're all cute when you're 23 or 24. Um, and then he wrote out a list of like 27 songs that I had to learn in 2 weeks because he said, then we're going to Amsterdam, rehearse, and then 2 weeks after that, we're going to play Wembley Stadium. And I said, great, thank you so much. And he said, well, we're going to be leaving in a week. I said, okay, I'll see you then. Um, and as I was walking out the door, I looked at the table, and there were 3 of those solo albums that I had made that I was sure nobody had ever even heard of. So I don't know, did he listen to them? I don't know, but that was how I got the job.
First of all, we all met in France. I got the gig, and I was really surprised because for me, the idea of replacing Dee and Nigel I was going, what? And it was one of those calls. I got a call from Joe Walsh first, and he called me and he said, listen, Elton's he wants to start a new band, and he's heard your work. Because he heard my work from Barnstorm. I said, you got to be kidding. Why? And he says, no, he wants to do something different, and he likes your work. And I said, okay. I mean, it was a shock. So I met Elton in New York. We flew to Paris. He said like 2 words to me. He gave me $100 bill to buy some magazines. Here I am in first class. It wasn't my first rodeo. I'd been on private stuff with Steven, but still I'm in cowboy boots, and he's like dressed in Cartier. We get off the plane. We get into a Rolls Royce convertible, and he's like obsessed with that I'm Not Alone 10cc record. He played it over and over and over.
Wow.
And I'm in this car. I'm going, wow. You know, I hadn't been to Europe yet. It was the first time I'd been to France, and I'm sitting in the back of a Corniche convertible, going, "Is this real? You know, is this?" And Elton's like sobbing, listening to 10cc. So I'm going, "What's going to happen next?" So we get to the chateau, and right away Elton says, "Well, I'm jet lagged. I have to go to bed." And I'm thinking, well, when do I audition? All of a sudden, there's Davy and Caleb and Roger and Davy. And I looked to the side, and there was cases of Dom Perignon, cases of Remy Martin. I'm going, wow, this looks like a party. Right? So Davy said immediately, I said, well, when do I audition? And he said, there's no audition. You wouldn't be here if this is what's happening. And it started out as that we were going to get together and work with the new band to see how we clicked on a Davy Johnson solo record. Right? Caleb, do you remember?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what happened is the electronics, it turned out that the studio was not operating. It wasn't recording properly. So we ended up just having a playback of Captain Fantastic. And I'm going, why am I here? I mean,
Yeah.
the record was, Dee and Nigel were just, I mean, the whole record was
Yeah.
spectacular. And so that was it. He said, that's it. You know, we had some time off, I think. And Davy had a place in the Dordogne, or, you know, the country area. And my deal was I went with Davy so I could start learning the material.
Yeah.
And basically, I don't remember learning too much of the material there. We had a really good time there. We all met to start rehearsing, right,
Right.
Caleb?
Yeah.
In Amsterdam. So we stayed there for a month.
Yeah. Right.
At the Hilton. And
That's-
then we did the gig at Wembley, and then everybody flew to Caribou.
Very smoky.
There were a lot of fires in the cabins.
Yeah. Oh boy.
It was good atmosphere because we had all become friends, you know. So by the time we got to Caribou, we'd done a couple of things, but the important thing was to get a new band album. So yeah, they were all very excited to be involved in it, which was great. Ray and I obviously had done several albums at Caribou at this point, so we knew what to expect there. Yeah, everybody was pretty excited, I think, and there was a very up atmosphere. Elton was looking forward to it because it had been his idea, obviously, to have the bigger band and change things around, and I just helped him put it together and pick the guys that we thought would work best for this kind of a band, you know.
It was a terrific atmosphere. I mean, for me, it would most probably be a little different for Kenny, because Kenny has more extensive history, longer history with Caribou than I do. So when we went over there, like myself and Roger Pope, it was my first time being in Colorado Rockies there. So it was like stepping into an old TV movie that we grew up, because we grew up watching the Westerns on TV and stuff. So I never forget when we were driven from the airport, from Denver Airport, all the way up to the ranch there. We drove into the driveway into the ranch, and we could see all these cowboys herding cattle. I mean, what in the world I mean, it was just amazing. So it was like a whole kind of Disneyland experience on steroids for us, you know. And recording wise, so you had this whole, kind of cowboy Western ambiance, you know. And then you go into this incredible state-of-the-art recording studio, which on the outside looks like a barn. Then you go in and there's all this gear and there's this perfect recording situation, you know. So that was really impressive to me. I always thought, you know, Jim Guercio had a brilliant idea to establish that place where you could just get away from the big city hustle, you know, whether it's Hollywood or London and the studios there, and just go disappear into the mountains and be surrounded by all this beautiful nature and make music. I was highly impressed.
First of all, I'm a native of Colorado, and so I've experienced the mountains since I grew up here. When we got there, all they had was you walked up the stairs. There was no elevator yet,
Right.
and we walked up the stairs, and it was the same thing like Caleb experienced. All of a sudden, the doors were open, and you were in this lush control room with leather and beautiful brown carpet and a stone fireplace, and
Yeah.
it was incredible. And then you walked past the glass into the studio itself, and there was two Steinways and a drum booth and a B3, everything you'd ever want to record in. So all of a sudden, boom, there we were. So I had experienced that. I worked there with Joe. We did 2 albums, but I also worked there with Stephen Stills. Caribou was incredible, but I'd never been on a ranch, a dude ranch. I mean, the place was like a dude ranch. There was 9 buildings there, and each cabin was tricked out, right, Caleb?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the mess hall was everything was everywhere you looked there was pony skin rugs, there were leather couches, there was a piano in each cabin. It was pretty amazing place.
Yeah.
So that was, I'd worked there considerably. We all got together, and it was next question.
Yes.
Caribou Ranch was part of that whole blissful dream that I was in. And the dream was just continuing. I remember I was nervous because at one point when we were in Amsterdam or something, or Wembley, Elton had said, "Oh, I love if you can play Hammond organ on some of these tracks, it'd be great." And I wasn't really a Hammond organ guy. I mean, obviously I could play it, but it's a whole technique. It's a whole, you're changing sounds while you're playing. And I was kind of nervous. I said, "Well, I don't really play it." And I was really scared that I wasn't going to continue to get the job if I didn't do well. But he said, "Don't worry about it." So anyway, I ended up playing Hammond organ just fine. And yeah, there we were, and Caribou Ranch. And I met Gus Dudgeon then, I think, who I adored. And we hit it off really well. And the whole thing was just fantastic. What was Caribou like? Everybody had their own cabins, right? And I got to be, Elton chose me to be in his cabin. But, we were in opposites. They were miles away. He was upstairs on one side. So it was never weird. But Caribou was great. I got to play with these, Roger Pope and Caleb Quay and Davy Johnstone. These people were just, especially Davy, because Davy was like the face of the Elton John band. And I just used to look at these guys, like in Yellow Brick Road and all these different album covers, and Ray Cooper, of course. And I thought it'd be very, very intimidating, but they welcomed me into the band so warmly. And Davey and I have remained the closest of friends, as I am with Ray, although Ray is really hard to get in touch with most of the time. And it was just a terrific experience. I learned a lot about making a record, working with Elton John, because Gus Dudgeon was such a spectacularly good producer. And I watched how he worked, and I saw the process in different ways. And so it was just wonderful.
But first of all, Jimmy Guercio brought up and made an extraordinary atmosphere, an extraordinary environment before the atmosphere for musicians to come to play. It was born out of his knowledge of how music can transpire, can transform itself into other things with great environmental help. But it was an extraordinary landscape, to be up there in the Rockies, in this extraordinary place, which I think it also had the only private reservoir in the whole of America. It supplied all the water for the local towns, and it was wild. And it was a very beautiful environment, as I said, but very comfortable. And the studio, coming to the crux of the matter, was absolutely splendid. One of the state-of-the-art, beautiful studio. So Jimmy really succeeded, along with other great producers like Sir George Martin, who did the same thing. He realized that about the atmosphere and the environment for making music is so important and helpful. So getting there, landing in Colorado, and then this long road, windy road up into the mountains was very exciting. And we each had a log cabin to live in, and food was fantastic. And then the excitement of getting into that incredible studio, which it really was. And the crew that Jimmy had around him was so extraordinary. The cook, the people that maintained the studio, they were so helpful. They built a special sort of lid that went on the top of Elton's piano. That was an experiment by Gus Dudgeon, who was a genius producer. And of course, we must never forget him, because without him, all of this wouldn't have happened. And that made the acoustic of the piano very, very special. The microphones went into the lid that was, like a house built over the piano. It was quite extraordinary. And anything we wanted to try, we were allowed to do, and we were enabled to do. What do you want to do next was always the question that the crew at Caribou did. I loved them all. They were so lovely, and Jimmy was such an extraordinarily generous and hospitable man, and his wife and his family, beautiful people. So we arrived, and we sort of started to get to know each other. I mean, I hadn't seen Caleb. I knew him from England, of course, because that's where he originally comes from. Roger Pope, the drummer who I'd worked with before. But it was the first time we'd actually got together to work on Sir Elton John's work, and also to start a new journey, a new adventure, with dare I say, a harder edge to the sound of the music, which is what Sir Elton wanted to try. He wanted to. It was he was always, and he always will be, such an inquisitive musician, and wants to always try new things. And that's the blessing of being able to work with him.
So yeah, it was good. It went very well. The thing that was difficult was the fact that up to that time, and all the albums we'd made up to that point, especially since Honky Chateau, since it was a band, we'd done all the overdubs ourselves, pretty much everything. If there was a keyboard overdub, like a Mellotron or organ, Elton would do it. And, so we came up with really great, cool parts without having to have a specific synthesizer player, for example. We did all that stuff ourselves. And obviously all the guitar work I would do myself, whether it was doing some acoustics and adding electrics and then playing solos. So now we had a bigger band, and I tend to be the kind of musician, I don't know how to really put it. I think James Newton Howard mentioned it to me several times. He said, Davey, you're the most generous musician I've ever met, meaning that I was willing to, step aside and let other people like Caleb take a solo here and there and do that kind of thing. Because after all, this was a new band and we were splitting guitar chores, Caleb and I, and we'd played together, years before on many sessions. We'd done a bunch of things before, Bernie's poetry album, and some stuff on Madman Across the Water together. So we knew each other really well and we really got on great. So that wasn't going to be an issue. I was especially happy about James Newton Howard because being a keyboard player, wonderful piano player, obviously, as well, he was coming with some great ideas and possibilities of doing things that we never thought about before, like the stuff he did on the medley on Wednesday night and that kind of thing. It was just phenomenal. I was blown away, and his clavinet playing, he was like following on from what Stevie Wonder had introduced to everybody with the sound of the clavinet, with Superstitious and all that kind of thing. And James was doing that stuff live. And if Elton came up with the piano part, we found that James could double it really well. He did that on many tracks, like Grow Some Funk of Your Own, and trying to think a couple of other things where he played the same as Elton, and it really had a great effect. And it was great for Ray because he had already experienced being a part of this band. So he just did his usual thing and got to play more vibraphones, which he's great at. And he used that also on Grow Some Funk of Your Own, and I believe on Robert Ford as well. Anyway, there was all kinds of stuff going on. Kenny was a perfect addition to the band at the time because his bass playing was very different from Dee. His bass playing was very much, he would play the root note and he would just hang in there like a normal bass player would. And it worked great for the big band because my worry was that it was going to be too much going on all the time. So I was consistently trying to remind people, hey, you know what? This is a band. We know you're good. That's why we hired you. You don't have to play all over the whole track. So just relax and enjoy the feeling of being part of this great band. And that's really, I think, what happened. Occasionally I would even leave off a track. I think not so much on that album, more on Blue Moves, for the second one we did with the band. Because again, I saw it getting a bit busy right about that point. And that's always been a worry of mine because I feel one of the important things that we created between Elton, myself, Dee, Nigel, and then Ray was the space. I'm a great believer in the space between the notes being as important as the notes themselves. So to me, that was a very, very important, situation that I was trying to get over to everybody. And because space is so important, there's no point filling every track up with something, with music or pads or this or that, because then the soul of the music becomes diluted. I think my favorite phrase in music has always been less is more. So lay out, play a little less and just do what's really necessary at that point. So those were the important things. And Roger is a wonderful drummer. I mean, I miss him. A great guy as well. Roger and I had played together several times also on Madman, and also he played percussion on Step Into Christmas, which is still one of my favorite tracks. It was an amazing track. And Roger played tambourine on that after Nigel had played the drums. So yeah, I mean, it was a great combination of people. And then Kiki and I were together at the time, Kiki Dee, and we did most of the backgrounds. Kiki and I and Caleb came in, and maybe Kenny, but I think it was just mostly myself, Kiki, and Caleb that did most of the vocals that were needed on that album. Like Dan Dare, there was some cool parts, and Grow Some Funk. So it was very different from the vocals that Dee and Nigel and I had created. Maybe not quite as pretty and beautiful and thought out, but that had been a very important part of our sound So on this album, it was more a case of let's try and do a more rocky album, you know, hence Rock of the Westies. And then when we went on the road with it, and beforehand also we'd use some background singers because of the tracks that we had to do without Dee and Nigel. So those were the challenges for me, having to make that thing work and hopefully continue to be as successful as it had been up to that point. And thankfully, Island Girl was a big hit, and Grow Some Funk of Your Own was another, you know, a hit, which we began starting our shows with, which was a great show opener back in those days. So yeah, it was a very productive time.
My memory of recording Rock of the Westies is one of the best times ever because it was a new band. It was with Elton, who was no dictator, right? He was just lovely to work with. But Roger Pope is one of the greatest drummers I had ever worked with. He was so funky and so powerful, and Caleb knows better than anybody. It was an incredible band. Rock of the Westies was the beginning of it for me, and to be in this band with these incredible musicians.
Yeah. Roger and I had always been close, as you know. We'd been working together for years. And we were fans of Kenny. You know, I remember when Roger told me that, you know, Elton was putting a new band together, he wants you in it, you know, and we're going to get Kenny Passarelli. I said, what? Kenny Passarelli? You talking about Joe Walsh's bass player? Yeah, because we were big fans of Joe Walsh's, you know, Barnstorm. Me and Roger couldn't wait to play with Kenny. And it just fit like a glove. I mean, it was just amazing. Kenny most probably plays, and this might sound a bit technical, but an eighth note feel on the bass. Boo, 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 boo. So solid, it just like, you just never heard anything like it.
Yeah, some bass players would say, they call me One Note Kenny.
Well, you had a way of playing it where it just sounded so interesting and sounded so perfect.
For me, I played what was supposed to be played, because what these guys did, when you listen to that record and you listen to Caleb, you listen to Davey, you listen to the slide, you listen to the leads, you listen to the rhythm parts. I mean, these guys, all I was doing was laying down the foundation for them to do whatever they were going to do. And Elton played amazing piano. Then you've got James Newton Howard playing clavinet and organ and, I mean, electric piano, whatever. So for me, that was the only thing that was needed to be played for me. And you hear what the guitars are doing. What about the marimbas? Ray Cooper, it was a phenomenal experience for us. And I think it really it projected on, I mean, when you listen to that record to this day.
I think about that quite often because he didn't need me. He could have gone on being incredible Elton John, writing incredible songs, incredible performer. My thought was that he didn't need me, but I think I ended up contributing. But I'm not sure that he knew exactly. I think he wanted just some more color, meaning synthesizer. One thing that I felt was really important with Elton is to create space, is to not create so much going around him that you don't focus on his voice and the piano, which is the most important thing. Everybody else is there to support Elton's voice and the piano. So I was always very economical about what I would play. And I can hear it, you know, I can hear that a lot of times I'd take a synthesizer sound and I would just play a downbeat of a chord, or I play some little lick up here, like on, I guess Billy Bones, for instance, a good example where there was this like, oh, he sings this part, oh, your majesty, or your majesty. And I brought in these sort of synthesizer trumpets, like the King thing. But he could have had somebody else do that, but to do it live was really exciting for him. And my other main job was doing all the orchestral parts that Paul Buckmaster had written, which on synthesizer, because he wrote them for strings. And he was another one of my biggest heroes. So now we are at a place where Elton could hear that live on stage, hear those parts. And I remember in Amsterdam, we were rehearsing, and I'm on one side of the stage looking that way, and he's on the other side of the stage we're looking at each other, right? And then the band is in between. And the first song we did, I think, was Don't Let the Sun. And you just can't imagine what I was feeling like at that point. I mean, it almost brings me to tears. It was just, what the hell? What is happening here? It's Elton. He's playing, I'm going to do something here. And I came in early and I wanted to commit suicide on the spot. And I'm sorry. Anyway, and then we went on to another song, like Tiny Dancer or something. And I was playing those parts and I saw Elton look over Davey and this big smile. And he was really happy. And I knew then everything was going to be okay, that I had found my slot. And then everything else was just, as I said, just trying to color things, support him, be as musical as I could be, try not to ruin the record. That's really my effort, just like I try not to ruin movies. But yeah.
Working with this relatively new group of musicians, what they're bringing to that environment. Caleb, Roger, James with ever growing instruments, and the fact that what Elton was writing with Bernard Wirtz enabled me to bring into the situation more orchestral in instruments like the marimba, the xylophone, the vibraphone, and doing all sorts of different things with the vibraphone, bowing it with a long bass bow to make a strange noise. These are all orchestral things that, again, the reference points from my background, able to bring that into the studio. And that goes back to how helpful the studio technicians were. They were just wonderful. It was all new stuff that was coming in. And Elton was very generous in the way he embraced it all. James and myself are cut from the same kind of cloth. We have sort of classical backgrounds. And of course, when you have that musical reference, it is all about space, and it's about the gap between the notes and the beauty of what comes, etc. So James is an extremely bright man, erudite, but an incredible musician too. I recognized that when he was in the band. When he first came into the band, I recognized that he was much more than a keyboard player. And I suggested to Elton that he used him on the Blue Moves as the arranger, because they were looking for a new arranger. And I said, well, you've got one in the band. And they said, what do you mean we've got one in the band? And I said, well, James has got all that under his, James is an arranger, he's a composer.
I think most probably the key to it was that both Elton and James were classically trained. So they had an ear for arrangements. That's where James is brilliant. I mean, he's not only a great pianist, keyboard player, but he has an arranger's mind. So he could listen to what Elton's doing and understand the context, the musical context, the harmonic context of what he's doing, and then approach it that way without getting in Elton's way. I think that's the brilliance of James. And he was a fan of Paul Buckmaster, so he kind of studied those arranging techniques and everything.
That's a great answer, Caleb. That is brilliant. That's exactly right. It's true.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
So he could do the arranging. I mean, he had an arranger's mind, but he also sonically being able to come up with playing the clavinet. Because when we were set up there, he had clavinet, B3, electric piano, And
Yeah.
then I don't think he ever played acoustic piano along with, I mean, Elton did all the acoustic piano. I mean, that's Caleb's answer is just like exactly that's true. That's what he brought. That's what James brought to the game.
Yeah. And then also, well, later on, when we did Blue Moves, James got hold of the Oberheim synthesizer. And he was one of the first guys to get it because he knew Robert Oberheim, who invented it. So this was the first polyphonic synthesizer where you could actually play chords. Prior to that, it was just one note at a time. Wow. So James was ahead of the curve on a lot of stuff. And so not only was he classically trained, but he understood physics. He used to talk to me about that. You know, yeah, guy was brilliant. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. That's why Elton called him a genius because he was. I mean,
yeah,
he had perfect pitch too.
All of that.
When we were rehearsing for Wembley, James was in his hotel room just writing charts without having to play a note. He just it was just amazing. He's an extraordinary, and I'm not surprised after all these years that he'd have 10 Academy Award nominations.
Oh,
Give me a break,
oh
right?
yeah.
This is the great blessing that one has when working with Sir Elton, because, you know, he has this extraordinary ability to look at a lyric, which of course comes to him first from Bernie. I've never, ever leave out of these conversations, because without those incredible words, I mean, seriously, incredible words, inspirational, engaging, tantalizing, provocative words that he writes, this wouldn't happen. And Sir Elton, literally, as I've said so many times, and so many people said, he sits at the piano and within 15 minutes or less, a song comes out. And it's never ceased to amaze me and ceased to make me feel so privileged to be in a same room with him when that happens. It's like he's a conduit for an extraordinary flash of creativity that comes through. And he forms a beautiful song, and then we are witnesses to it and just take our place in helping the arrangement come to fruition with our and that's why he handpicks his musicians. He knows what we do, and he chooses you because that's what you're going to offer to the work. This was a new environment, because a new situation, because we had two musicians that hadn't been in the band before, but Elton knew very well because he'd worked with them before on previous albums. They were some of the original musicians, along with people like Herbie Flowers, who was the great bass player, and Barry Morgan, the great drummer. These were all musicians that had worked with Elton, and that Elton knew because he himself was a studio musician. As a singer, as a pianist, he got to know these wonderful musicians, and he used them in the early albums. So we'd all spent time together, but this was the first time we were making an album together, and it was very exciting. So there were no musical challenges in the sense of the songs, because Elton, it just flowed out of him as usual, an extraordinary rate of knots. And then the challenges were how to generate new arrangements that were to give Elton what he wanted, this harder edge, this getting into, I suppose, what colloquially called funky music, and edgy music, more with a rock and roll edge. And but the personnel involved were, they were well versed in able to do that.
I was I'm classically trained musician, so Elton would play one of the new songs and I would just be writing the chord charts, so I could learn it instantly, or at least learn the chords. And So I remember it all coming together really quickly. You have a group of really brilliant musicians. I'm not calling myself brilliant, but they were all brilliant. And so learning the songs happened very quickly. Um, and then we would just start doing takes. And as is the case with Elton, he hasn't got a lot of patience. So, you get it right soon, early. And the one of the many things about Elton that is so admirable is that and amazing that he would never tell you what to play. He would never say, "Oh, well, maybe if you were playing something really terrible, he might say, I don't like I don't like that part." But generally speaking, he lets you do what you wanted to do, and I found that just incredibly generous and surprising that anyone would do that. So on his level, yeah.
The Street Kids, we knocked that out live in the studio.
It's true.
Yeah, my
Because-
guitar solo and everything like that. It was all done live.
You know what? That's it, and that was the bass that he kept. I didn't overdub that, so that was the live track. And then Elton would I don't know. He didn't seem to like to do his vocals at 8,600 feet, if I remember right. He would do a scratch vocal, right? But
Right. Yeah,
I don't recall him doing any keeper vocals. So when we'd come to LA, when we did the backgrounds Caleb, it's Caleb, Davey and Kiki on a couple and myself playing, singing backgrounds in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
On all the backgrounds that when you see the credits, it shows which ones we sang. We did that as a group. So that was even the extra thing that we got that we were singing to the tracks, all of us. It was magic. It was absolutely magic.
The chemistry was amazing.
Yeah.
Elton and I were hanging out. Bernie wasn't there, but Elton and I were hanging out in his log cabin. We each had a log cabin up in the Caribou Ranch. It's such a beautiful place, beautiful. And we were just in there chatting and whatever. And I had an acoustic guitar, and I was just sitting on the couch. As we were talking, I was just playing along, just whatever. And I was playing something, and he said, "What is that? That's beautiful." And I said, "I don't know. It's just a piece that I've composed. I kind of stole it from a classical piece, but I can't remember what the piece was." And he said, "Oh, that's beautiful." He said, "Play it again." So while I was playing it, Elton got a stack of lyrics that Bernie had sent him for the sessions, and he started going through it. And he said, "I know I've got something in here that reminds me of what you were playing." And he pulled out this lyric, and he said, "Okay, play it again." So I played the piece again, and he started singing Kate the Songbird. And he actually started singing it, and I played it all the way through to the end, my piece, and he sang it all the way to the end. I mean, it was one of those moments where we looked at each other and we went, "Holy shit, that really is beautiful." How did you do that? I was going because the way that Elton can envisage a lyric around a tune is remarkable. That's always been one of his main points of genius that I've always been just so thrilled by. And so, yeah, we wrote that song literally in the time it took to play from the beginning to the end. So we wrote it in like 10 minutes or something. And yeah. And we actually didn't record that on these sessions. We kept it for the Blue Moves album. But that same night was when we wrote Grow Some Funk. And so, yeah, there was all this productive stuff going on all the time. And that evening, though, in Elton's cabin was a really memorable one, because we just come up with something. It was like, "Oh my God, this is great. Can't wait to record this one or that one," So, yeah.
I do remember one time, and we had to stop the recording session because a helicopter showed up with a bunch of lawyers. John Reed was the manager at the time, and so him and a bunch of suits get off the helicopter, and we had to sign contracts for the upcoming tour, the Rock of the Westies tour. So that just destroyed the whole recording vibe right there, the whole creative vibe, you know, that went out the window for a few hours. You know, that I thought that was interesting.
That's an interesting one. I mean, it's the memory of being in the recording room with Elton and Bernie. Bernie was there in those days, and at the recording sessions, and sometimes still writing lyrics. It was such a warm environment. It was such a creative environment. We knew something very special was happening all the time in the studio. Not necessarily breaking new ground, but we were rearranging things. We were rearranging the furniture, and it was looking very good. You know, the house was warming, and that's what I carry with me. And they're the things that I miss now. You know, being in the studio with Sir Elton, working in that kind of environment, and but you know, things move on, and you know, he is constantly changing because he's got, as I said earlier, this wonderful inquisitive mind about what happens if, what happens when, you know, which is a joy. It's a joy.
Elton hadn't completed the songs. Remember, Caleb?
Right, right.
Well, you guys, because Caleb was you were with your wife. Did your wife? Yeah. So I was like one of the only single guys. So I was hanging out, and I remember turning pages of Bernie's lyrics as he was still writing material. He was like, again, I mean, I saw the magic. I saw it go down just as Caleb did way before this, back in the beginning. So, and he was always so pressured with so much to do, trying to find the time to write in the middle of touring and on the level he was at. The songs were freshly composed, and some of them were actually, as we started doing basic tracks, were being put together. And again, we had Caleb, we had Davey, and Caleb and Davey, especially with Caleb's background working with Elton, it was amazing because there you could see, you know, the trust that Elton had with Caleb's, you know, whatever Caleb's ideas were. It really became a band thing, but the importance of Caleb being there, and then Davey, who had been working with him for a while, the team effort was amazing. It was magic. It really was.
A number of them. One of them was, again, on Billy Bones. It was my first opportunity to play the solo in the middle of the track. And Elton said, "Well, James, why don't you do something in the solo there?" And so I did, and I wrote this thing, and I played dun, 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 dun. And the second half, Davey joined me, and he and I just hit it off so hard, so great. Then he played his part, and it ended up being just this totally cool deal. That was exciting for me. One of the more stressy parts was when I had done this solo on Island Girl. And it took me, you know, I was there with Gus, just he and I in the control room, and I was playing all this synthesizer stuff. And the solo, again, it was a solo, but I made it sound like these Hawaiian voices. If you listen to it, it's kind of islandy. And I worked on it for 2 days, and then Gus decided that it wasn't working, so he erased it. And I was kind of like, "Oh, okay. I'm not going to, you know, argue with Gus Dudgeon." And Davey got wind of it and kind of freaked out and said, "I can't believe you erased that. It was great." And so I had to we redid the whole thing again. Only Davey again joined me in the second half, and it turned out to be great. But it was one of those things that we could all joke about. Um, because we didn't have the kind of recording capacity back then that we do now. Yet, and we did not have endless tracks, and so you had a limited amount of space. So I was probably taking up 12 tracks with my solo with all these different parts. But we ended up working it out. What else was there? I really loved working on Robert Ford because I was standing next to Elton in our cabin. I think it was called Ure, maybe. And he was at the piano, and I was there, and I saw him take the lyric of Robert Ford out of a pile and put it up on the piano and instantly just write the song as I was watching. And I've never seen anything like it. And he played it through a couple of times, then he went to bed. And is he going to remember that tomorrow? I mean, and of course he did perfectly. And I think the beginning of the song, for me, the first couple of verses are just me and Elton. And those kinds of moments were pretty thrilling. I mean, again, I'd never had those kinds of opportunities. I'd never had all that equipment. You know, they basically said when I got the job, what equipment did you want? I go, okay, two ARP 2600s, an ARP 2500, a Mini Moog, clavinet, Fender Rhodes, Wurlitzer, and a Mellotron, maybe. And of course, they were all there, ready to go. And so I had all those great instruments to call upon. And when you have great sounds, composing they kind of compose themselves. You know, I mean, I can understand why, like Strawberry Fields, like Paul, I think, played that dee -don dee on a Mellotron. And that part came because of the sound of that instrument, I'm sure, because it's just the way it goes. And so I had a lot of tools that were really good and useful. And then listening to Caleb and Popey, they were just so great. And Kenny, of course. And the rhythm section was just so strong that somehow my parts just fell into place. And I don't think there was ever a collision of everybody trying to steal the spotlight ever, because it was just, and you know, some people thought that was the best band he'd had. I think every band he's had is the best band he's had. I mean, so, but it was good.
Jim Guercio rented a helicopter, which was completely illegal to land. And we got on the helicopter and flew during the Rock of the Westies session. We flew to Fort Collins, and there's real controversy about this, because we went, and there's some footage on YouTube, I've seen it, where we were backstage with the Stones and you know, having a great time, and there was going to be this huge party with Ahmet Ertegun and Barry Fay. All these big shots were having a barbecue at Caribou after the gig. But Elton got asked to come. They said they introduced him as Reg, if I remember right. And he had a Dodger Stadium. He had a Dodger coat on, and he had a cowboy hat. And he went up and played, but he never got off the stage. And Mick and Keith, they, you know, we're backstage partying, having a great time. Everything's groovy. And all of a sudden we hear, everybody from Caribou, get the fuck out of here, or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, we had to leave.
We
were ordered off, and Elton came off the stage, and it was Caleb. Remember, it was you and Davey and Elton and me in the limo, because there was no helicopter to take us back, and we were in the limo and had a drive from Fort Collins back to Caribou. And the whole time Elton didn't say anything, and we're like we're going, wow, I don't know what happened there, but who cares? You know, they suck. Let's go back up to Caribou, man. They suck.
As usual, I always gave Gus a bit of a hard time. about certain things, but not really, because we'd come to trust him so much. He was just like a member of the band. Gus knew the way we played, the way we thought, this kind of thing, and he was willing to try things that were different. And so yeah, we were doing all of this, our usual crazy stuff in the studio, and Gus was just on hand to trans, to transmit it into a beautiful recording. Because Gus was an amazing engineer. He wasn't just a producer. He actually was a producer who was an engineer. I mean, from all his work with David Bowie on Space Oddity and those other songs. I mean, the guy was just a great engineer. And he loved things that were different. So, yeah, I mean, I really liked the album. I'm trying to think if there was anything I didn't like, but no, I liked all of it. And I particularly liked the way that Island Girl went straight into Grow Some Funk of Your Own. There's hardly a beat when Island Girl finished, and then my guitar started Grow Some Funk. And some of those moments when they're done properly, and Gus was really good at those moments, they were really quite thrilling. And I'm sure those are things that some of the fans have noticed over the years, when they listen to any albums that we've done. It's the way that we would put one song after another, and there'd be a real reason we do that. And in that way, I'm very old-fashioned, because today I still plan my music the same way. I consider that it's really important that an artist, if he writes a whole body of an album, that people would hear it that way. Nowadays, unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. People record singles and then get it out as quickly as possible and do a video with it, and then they wait to see how that does, and then they'll release another single. In our day, it was much more, this is what we've done this year, or this part of this year, and this is who we are. So it was very, very artistic and very much, what we wanted to do. Whereas I don't think there's too many artists working like that today. Thinking about the way the album flows into one. I'm sure there are some. I'm probably like Neil Young is one who I love. I love all these guys, and yeah, I just think it's a shame, a lot of the stuff we've lost. So I'm very grateful there are people like yourselves who are fans of music, and you like to hear things the way people, artists recorded them, because that's the way we meant them to be heard.
Gus was a master. Gus Dudgeon was a master. And the mixes were always stunning. When we all were back, it's like being on Mach 5, whatever it is. You push back into your seat by the overwhelming understanding that Gus Dudgeon had of space, which we go back to that word again. He really, he controlled the sound in such a pristine way that I don't think I've really experienced before and since, really. His understanding and the way he got sometimes very, it was very tedious sometimes, but the end result, we always trusted Gus. He would want things again and again. He'd work on the drum sound or my sound for some hours and sometimes days. But you knew that this was wonderful work in progress. You were working with a master. He knew exactly. He was a true former Times producer. He was an organic producer. He was interested in what you could do more than what you thought you could do on your instrument. He provoked that from you, and that I'll always be grateful. And again, I miss him very much, dear Gus. We all miss him.
I was, I'm sure, and I can't tell you exactly what I was thinking, but I remember I was still smoking cigarettes, because there's a picture of me listening to it, and I'm just kind of in the back smoking a cigarette. But we were all, it was just, the dream continued. The dream just continued. I don't think I was super critical of any parts I played. If I listen now to the album, it's such a great album. It's just a great rock and roll album. I thought I did interesting stuff on Dan Dare, which is playing a clavinet through a 2600 synthesizer and popping the filter, and that had a funny kind of sound. I think in a lot of the songs, I think there was a smile in a lot of them, right? And a couple of them not, of course, but Dan Dare certainly had a smile in it.
As we finished the last basic track and it was time to party because we were all celebrating the fact that we just had completed this. As I
Yeah.
was walking out, Gus said, come here, I need to speak to you. And I said, what? And again, you know, the last thing I'm going to do is bite the hand that feeds me. And Gus was such a superstar. You know, he was dressed like he just got off stage. Right? He was a bit arrogant for me, but I wasn't going to say. He said, "Listen, I didn't get a sound on your bass. Do you have any other basses?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well," in his way, he said, "You better find one, and you better find one now." So I called up Jimmy, and I said, "Jim," because Jimmy being a bass player too, other than guitar and everything else, he says, "I've got 3 basses. Come up and take a look and grab them." So I went up there and I drug down 3 basses. He had a Gibson, and then he had, I don't think he had a Fender, and then he had a Hofner bass that Paul McCartney had given him when he mixed the Ram record. He mixed Ram, and Paul McCartney had given him a Hofner. But the problem was the action, the strings were this high off the bridge, and that was the only bass that Gus could get a sound with. So I'm going, oh man, this guy's torturing me. What's he trying to do? Get me fired and call Dee back? I mean, literally.
Wow.
And you guys didn't know any of this stuff.
No, I'm listening to this guy. This is blowing my mind.
Oh no.
You should write a book.
Oh no. So I sit there and I said, okay, well, if we're going to do this, I'm going to sit here and record the overdubs in the studio with you. And I don't know if you did that with Dee, but that's how we're going to do it. If this is the way you have to have it. I did impose myself there. And I proceeded to, he kept, I think, Feed Me and Street Kids are the only fretless bass he kept from the original. And then everything else I overdubbed. Island Girl, it was all in this Fender. And I think I had a bottle of Jack Daniels. I was in so much pain with my hands and I was hating him. I was totally hating him. But I wasn't going to say anything. I got it done. And then it was over. And then they did the guitar overdubs. Gus took the tapes to England. We had a playback in LA because that's where Elton did his vocals. And that's where we did our background vocals in Los Angeles. And when I heard the mixes and playback, you know, I was apologetic in my own mind for any evil thoughts I had for Gus Dudgeons. I mean, it was when we played them on the big speakers. Do you remember, Caleb?
Oh yeah.
Yell Help with Patti LaBelle.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it was just so funky and powerful. I was just going, wow, it blew me away.
It was the middle of summer, you know, so there wasn't much ski-doo happening, but there was horses, and I would go up, and one of my buddies was one of the guys who, this Native American, wonderful man, who used to look after the horses, and I'd go up there and hang with them and chat with them. Or we'd go hiking, or we'd go up to Bluebird, which was the ghost town that was on the property. And I used to like to do that because I'd go past the barn that was Joe Walsh's Barnstorm album. That was where that was taken from, because that's where he did the album. And Joe and I have been friends for many, many years. And that album really affected me. I loved the first Barnstorm album. And we realized pretty quickly in Caribou that we could work there. It was very much like the Chateau in a way, in that we all had sleeping arrangements there that were really fine. Everything was good. We had a breakfast room, we had a dinner room, we had all this kind of vibe. And so yeah, we've had a lot of fun times at Caribou Ranch. And Jimmy Garcia was a great host. Was a wonderful host. The Garcia family have always been important. That when I think of the albums we did there, they were all great to us.
I was always playing. If if the studio was open, the piano was open, I think Davey and I, maybe all of us would just go in and play and practice. That's what we were there for. That's what we do. I remember we went once in a helicopter. Elton took us to a Rolling Stone concert in Denver, I guess. And, we landed backstage in a helicopter. And before I knew it, I was in a room with Keith Richards and Charlie Watts. Just, I couldn't talk. I was just too shy in those situations. And I was out there, and then we stayed for the show, and Billy Preston was a huge idol of mine. I'm standing right next to Billy Preston while he's playing. That was a big one for me. That was crazy. I don't remember doing any fun stuff, but there was a lot of, it was rock and roll in the 70s.
Caleb, did you in the X, did you guys ever go horseback riding?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
you did.
Yeah.
Oh man, the ranch was incredible. You had horses there to ride. Oh, this is what I wanted to mention. This is an important part. The thing about Caribou Ranch was that when we set the mics up and the instruments, we never had to move them. If you were doing a 3-hour session in New York or in London, it was time to get out and break down for the next group that was coming in. Everything would change. At Caribou, you walk away, you record at 2 a.m, you record 11 o'clock the next day, you're going fishing, you're riding horses, nobody's in the mood. There's nobody tearing any of the equipment down.
That's right.
Remember the chef? I don't know, something it was like a 4-star. We had cookies. Everything was just perfect all the time in the West. Cookies are good, especially, in our state. We hung out together. We were all, we'd get together and Caleb would say, hey, have you listened to this? I mean, we were sharing music that we came to the table with, coming from different areas. So, man, it never stopped, Caleb, right?
Right.
We were hanging out. No, we all had dinners together, but we were exchanging, we were just getting to know each other as friends and musicians. So there was a lot of great stories, stuff. I mean, I'm from the United States. I was hearing all these stories of Caleb and all the different people he'd worked with, and Roger, and it was amazing. It really was. So when we were recording, we were getting to know each other.
We loved it. It was like being in a movie. I mean, the ranch was something like 40,000 acres. There was rivers and lakes and stuff, so I remember, one of the guys, the cowboy guys, they would arrange for us to go horse riding, and we'd be crossing rivers, just like a TV movie, just like, couldn't believe it. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
So it was an incredible experience for someone who'd never been in the West before. The ranch office was adjacent to the cabin, this big cabin, luxurious cabin where John Lennon stayed. Elton, it was a 3-bedroom place. And I wouldn't doubt that really inspired Bernie to, Bernie became super into, he's Brown Dirt Cowboy. Caribou experience for him, really. It's like what you were saying, Caleb, basically Bernie had said the same thing. Those guys in England grew up watching Westerns. Those guys had experienced it twice.
Yeah.
Davey had too. This was his 3rd time there. So anyway, that was what when we weren't recording, we were experiencing the ranch.
Yeah.
And then maybe going down to a bar in Netherlands. There was things like that.
That was a wonderful, again, what Jimmy Garcia had made, the environment. You could do everything sportif, relaxing, anything you wanted, together, collectively or singularly. You know, there were horses there. He had a complete collection of old jeeps and things you could drive around, and in the snow, because we were there as many times as seasons. We were there in the winter, we were in the summer. I think we had an autumn season there as well. So in the winter, it was completely snow, and there were bears, all sorts of wonderful, extraordinary things. And we were on ski badoos, whatever they call them, motorized, you know, great fun, dangerous sometimes. I remember, I never forget, well, one day we were told, please stay in your cabins. There is a bear on the loose, and which is extraordinary. The real thing. Suddenly, you are the zoo. That's the real person. The bear it's his territory, and it was a lesson to learn. No, that was the secret of Cowbrewers as well. Jimmy, again, going back to his extraordinary vision that he had to build this wonderful place where you could make music and also, you know, have your privacy, which is important, your moments to think, your moments to ponder, your moments of you know, joining in with all sorts of other activities. I'd never ridden a horse before, ever. So I got on my first horse in America at Caribou Ranch. All it wanted to do was eat grass. So I decided what was I to do, this poor thing? And so I got off the horse and said, "You eat the grass, I'll walk." But it was an interesting an interesting moment. I wasn't going to force this poor animal. But it was, yeah, again, and you know, there was a communal big canteen hall, or you know, where we all ate together every night with this wonderful cook. The food was fantastic, and we told our stories, and we did what, you know, it was wonderful to do with music. You know, you share things over the dinner table, over a glass of wine or whatever it is. You share and you feed and source from each other. And then we took that into the studio where, you know, everybody's light that shone enabled all our lights to be ignited, and you know, it works that way. It's a great team. It was a great band.
Probably Grow Some Funk, because I was so happy the way that turned out, because we'd written it the night before, you know, and it was like the way that we used to work in previous records. And I had a feeling it was this kind of band was going to be perfect for this kind of track, and it worked out great. It's like, I love that track. Yeah, I love that track. A lot of the fans seem to like feel like a bullet in the gun of Robert Ford, which is another one of Bernie Taupin's, the longest title in the world, Contender. There's been a few of those. That was nice. Yeah. There's a lot of good tracks on that album. You know, Dan Dare was great. Yeah, I think the whole experience was a lot of fun. You know, I mean, yeah.
It's Billy Bones. I mean, Grow Some Funk is great. Robert Ford's great. If I had to name one, I guess it would be Billy Bones, because of course I had a solo in it. But gosh, you know, they're just great songs. Hard Luck Story. They were just so fun to play. I'm going to stick with Billy Bones and the White Bird.
For me personally, most probably would be Street Kids.
Me too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's, you know, I think from a live, no, I agree with you, Caleb. That's the one that's got this magic
It's
feel.
just, yeah.
It's like, and Caleb would know this better than anybody, because being what he's done for so long, being in the studio since you were like 16 or, you know, he knows when there's magic. He's seen it, he's witnessed it. And when that thing comes together,
Yeah.
There's nothing like it. I mean, the only thing that could have ruined it if Elton couldn't sing properly.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you couldn't do the track was so powerful with the guitars. I mean, you
Right.
guys, it's just killer. It's a killer track. Caleb and Davey were phenomenal. It was like one gigantic guitar player with, one being able to play different styles within the context of whatever was going on with the song, whatever was needed. But it was really amazing. All the colors you can imagine, sonically. Don't you agree, Caleb?
Absolutely, yeah. I remember when we were working on that tune, me and Davey, because you remember we would just gather around the piano and Elton would play the song, and so you kind of get your cues from what he's doing. But I remember always thinking about, Derek and the Dominoes. Especially that opening line, it's kind of like Layla, Derek and the Dominoes, kind of a vibe on there. And I just felt like we nailed it. And the fact that we did it live, and it just, there's really no other way you can do it effectively outside of doing it live. It's that chemistry thing again. And you and Roger and Elton, the piano playing on that track.
Listen, Elton was like, he was between that one and again, the next record we did, Blue Moves, Elton's playing was extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, he really, he had different group of musicians. Some he worked with, some he didn't. And it created a whole other atmosphere for him.
Yeah.
And I think it freed him up. He was, and again, it was like, okay, either you got to jump on the train or you don't, because the train was going to move.
That's it.
And I think it took him to, it allowed him to stretch out in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I tell you what, when I listen to it now, the tempo at the end, I mean, when James is playing the clavinet, I mean, that track is ridiculous. I mean, I enjoyed overdubbing the bass part because it gave me a chance to really listen to Roger's bass drum. So in the verses, I could play a little bit more New Orleans-y tuba style. So the backgrounds, Patti LaBelle, we were all there when she came in Los Angeles, and LaBelle, it wasn't Pat, it was LaBelle. Yell Help is a monster song. Jeez, God. And that's live. I mean, other than the overdubbing, but the guitars and Roger and James Newton Howard and Elton's, it was a power. Again, each song had a real powerful foundation that really couldn't really be removed.
Right.
The surprise track, surprise. I loved Island Girl. It was a #1 hit but it was something that we hadn't really played like that before, and it enabled me to use the marimba and the xylophone, and lots of runs which up and down it, which I'm sure I couldn't do now. I was a lot younger then, and it's got a lot of joy in it. It's got a lot of joy. The whole album has got a lot of joy in it. So not to avoid the question of favorite, but the whole album for me it's very wonderful to listen to it again. And then of course there's the instrumental, Grow Some Funk, which we all had a part in writing and playing, and again enabled me to use a whole extraordinary amount of instruments on it, overdubbing, glockenspiels and vibraphones and God knows what else, all of which were impossible to do live because I've only got one pair of hands, but it was wonderful to do that on record. Yeah, again, coupled with the warmth which I talked about earlier, and the new talent that came into the band that again we all bounced off of, and it was another level of growth for all of us. Yeah.
I can't believe we're talking about this 50 years later. I mean, it's unbelievable.
I can't believe we still can talk.
Yeah.
You know, it was just it was like a relief for me that the album did well and the band was able to come in and do a fairly smooth, transition from such a successful smaller band that we had. So it was kind of a big relief that it came off, and also there was a couple of great songs on it that allowed us to use them in our ongoing stage shows, because it was very important at that point. Elton, we were the most prolific, if not the most popular touring band in the world at that point. So it was important that we kept up that front and that united front, that we could go out there and do a great live show. A lot of the fans found it difficult. The first tour, they all missed Dee and Nigel, as I did, because that was the most difficult part for me, because those guys were my brothers, and are, I miss Dee every day. Nigel and I talk at least a couple of times a week. So it was difficult, and for me, it was a relief that it all worked out so well, and the album did great. So who's going to argue with that?
It kind of made me a tiny bit famous in LA in terms of doing session work, because I was a session musician, not the busiest. I never thought of myself as the A-list session musician. What I was really good at was doing synthesizer stuff and doing orchestrations. Like if Barbra Streisand wanted strings on this song, they would call me. What it did is, I remember there was a gigantic billboard on Sunset Boulevard, gigantic, with Rock of the Westies, Elton's, the cover of the album on there. And I was living near there, and I would just drive by that like over and over. Now Caleb and Kenny and Roger had already had moments, and Davey, of course, moments of celebrity where they were kind of used to being on the inside cover or something, but that was really exciting for me just to see that. And I think I did gain a small amount of notoriety in the record business for doing some of the kinds of parts that I did with Elton. Although I didn't really do an orchestration for Elton until the next album, till Blue Moves. Then I did a bunch. And again, Elton, I said, I'll skip to Blue Moves for one quick second. On Blue Moves, I said, Elton, because I always wanted to do this. Can I write the string arrangements for this album? And he said, well, have you ever done it before? And I said, no. He said, let me think about it. But I kind of knew I could do it. So the next day, though, he came back to me and said, yeah, you can do it. Do whatever you want. And that was the way he was. And then I did Tonight and all those other things. And so, yeah, I thank him a lot.
It was another important part of Elton's journey. It was, as we've said, it was a new lineup, which gave birth to this album, and it was to give birth to another round of performances, touring, and we all learned from it. Elton learned from it, and in readiness for the next step that he was about to do. There've been so many levels because of his inquisitive nature, because he's a real musician. He wants to know more and more about this wonderful world of music, which we can never learn all of. It's just every moment. So he has surrounded himself with some extraordinary musicians, played with extraordinary people, and they with him. And that was, it felt very much that this was another very important rung in the ladder, or the stepping stones of this journey that we were all privilege to be on.
I mean, obviously, as you've heard, I mean, it was great fun to make it. And I think it marked a significant change in Elton's body of work. And I'm just happy to have been, you know, part of it. You know, I was there in the very beginning, you know.
For me, I was in Maui just like really going, what's going to happen next? I mean, I'm not working with Steven. I left Joe. I mean, my career is like, wow. And then to get the call to do this so it changed my life.
Well, that it was going to be called West of the Rockies originally, of course.
Interestingly, I don't know if you remember on the back side of the record, or the inside sleeve, Elton refers to me as a part-time telephonist. And I've had several people say, what is he talking about? And I say, well, back in the day with, telephone operators, they're always plugging one thing in. Hello, can I help you? Da, da, da. And of course, with synthesizers, you're doing these kinds of things too. You're plugging in chords. And so that's one thing I can tell them.
The amount of instruments that were used on it is quite astonishing. I mean, just my section, the percussion section, we literally did roll out virtually everything that's used in the orchestra. The xylophones, the tubular bells, the glockenspiels, everything about it, the tuned instruments, and it was wonderful. And again, Jimmy Guercio gave us a space to do this. It was, there were more instruments, I think, used on that album than I think I've seen on any other Elton John album as a group. Obviously, when he does the orchestral albums, then it's wonderful. But in the studio, we were stepping over instruments and being very careful, moving them away. But it was wonderful, wondering what to think, what to pick up next. That was the joy of it. Davy Johnson had everything there: mandolins, violins, everything was out there. 12 strings, but sitars. It was extraordinary. It really was extraordinary. So I wish I could have. We didn't have mobile phones, thank God, in a way, though those days. Again, we had time to think in those days, but there would have been so many pictures being taken if we did have, because it was such an incredible collection of wonderful instruments. Wonderful. Yeah, that's my. I wish everyone could have seen that.
We were a band. So if I was going to say anything, I would say that there's nothing like a band. And when a band, it can be captured on tape, there's something special that happens compared to, as they call it now, playing out of the box.
What makes it unique is that most of it was recorded live. Yeah, there was a few overdubs, but primarily the energy that you get is because the drums and the bass, the rhythm section, was recorded live. We were all playing together.
That's exactly right. Let me add one more thing to it.
Yeah.
Tom Dowd, who came up to Caribou and produced Rod Stewart before he was a recording engineer and then a producer, was a physicist, and he told Jimmy that the reason why the music that came out of Caribou Ranch was different was that there was a lack of oxygen at 8,600 feet. So when you were playing, the frequencies would hit the tape. Jimmy told me many times that he'd do the Chicago stuff and then they'd come down to LA, and the low frequencies were so powerful that they would blow speakers. Nobody could ever figure out, why is this happening? And Tom Dowd said, from a scientific point of view, that 8,600 feet tape, live musicianship, that playing live, that's why that record has the legs. It's different.
Yeah. And if I can add something to that, I was just thinking, also working with Elton was really great because he never told us what to play. We would just gather around the piano and he'd start playing the song and singing it, you know, and he would always give us free rein to bring our creativity to the table. He would never say, well, I need you to play an E flat here and whatever over here. None of that at all, you know. It was always like he'd play the song and say, what do you think, you know? So there was this thing going on while he's playing the song on the piano, we're gathered around the piano and we're listening. We're listening as to where we can fit whatever opens up for us. So there's that kind of chemistry is involved in it as well. That to me comes through.
Absolutely, Caleb, that's so well said, because that's what projects onto the tape.
Yeah, yeah.
That's exactly right. He let us, there was never any sort of any restraint on us.
Right.
Really wasn't. And so I think that's what Caleb says it all right there. It's true.
Yeah.
We were allowed to be who we are.
Yeah.
And we were a band.
He trusted.
It was organic. It really was.
He trusted our musicianship.
Exactly.
At that time, I just turned 24. So I was a kid, you know, I was still a kid, but I had to wear the grown-up shoes, you know, because of what we've been through. No, I think in most respects, I think I handled it pretty well. I think I would have probably told myself, you know, go easy on the tequila, take it easy on the hash, you know, watch out for the vodka, you know, and don't do any acid. That's good advice for anybody to this day.
Cut back on the extracurriculars. But you know, it's scary to say, it's dangerous to say that, because that sort of suggests that they had an impact on my playing. They did not. Whenever I was doing that kind of work, I'm a purely professional, seriously, you know, I take it very, very seriously. But I think maybe I would have wasted less time. I may have written, but I hadn't really written any movie scores at that time. Which is crazy. That didn't happen for another 10 years. Maybe enjoy myself more, because I was always worried about my parts. Is this good? Did I do enough? Am I contributing enough? But that's kind of the way I am with life, you know. I mean, I just did this big concert in Vienna with the Vienna Symphony, and it was just in the Musikverein, which is one of the most, this golden auditorium, which is where Brahms and Strauss and Mahler, you know, just insane. And all the people that I work with said, James, make sure you enjoy it. You know, try to enjoy the moment. And I did, but it was harder for me to do that when I was young. I was off everywhere but where I am, you know.
To be, which I learnt on all these albums, but particularly then to be completely open-hearted, open-minded, to be generous in with my fellow musicians, and always be you know, aware of space, and listen to what other people are doing, listen to what their conversation is. Our conversation with Elton and Bernie, that's the contract. We're having a conversation with this extraordinary musician and this extraordinary storyteller, Bernie Taupin, and we are conversing with him. So all that, you need to bring all that to the space. You need to bring your humanity, your humility, your open-heartedness and your open-mindedness. And I'm aware of it now. I hope then that I was aware of it then. And yeah, you know, Thank you for that question.
Man, and of course we were in our 20s.
Yeah.
I would do it all over again.
So would I. And
I would do it all over again. I have no regrets about it, if that's what's behind the question. Not at all. You know,
either do I. And it was, I think being a part, having the album, having our gold records and platinum records to remind us, and then occasionally hearing the song on the radio, whatever.
yeah.
We're very fortunate. We're very, right place, right time.
Yeah.
It was a dream come true.
I'm on stage with such monster musicians in the sense of their talent, that in my small story, it's about trying to illuminate and the joy that I feel about being in that situation. And again, trying to infect in the best way possible the audience with joy and of what I do in a simplistic way, because I'm working with such extraordinary people. The audience gives so much back to us performers, and that contract we have with each other should never be forgotten or underestimated. It's with great joy I step out on that stage every time I do. We all live on this planet together, and if allowed, we all hold hands, and if it's not physically, it's through our thoughts. And I send so much love to all of you, and I know that comes back. Bless you.
So great to celebrate. Geez, I can't believe 50 years ago, Rock of the Westies. Incredible honor for me to be on the stage with Davey and Caleb and Roger, Ray Cooper, James Newton Howard, and what can I say, Elton John. Our performance at Dodger Stadium to this day is one of my best experiences of my whole musical career and my performing career. So I just want to thank all the fans and all the feedback that we've received over the years, some of it negative, but I think Rock of the Westies was a band, highly charged rock and roll with edge, and I believe that's what Elton wanted to do, and I think we accomplished that. When I listen back to it, it's fantastic. So want to again thank everyone for all their interest after all these years. Bye.
I'll say to the fans, not only of this, but people probably know me better for movies at this point, and they often will thank me for this music, and I want to thank them. And because without fans, it's just kind of an empty experience, because the music is meant to communicate something to people. And that's the one thing I started to really understand when I first started doing film concerts. It's just to connect with the people finally that were listening to my music out there. And I never even imagined that people were listening to it. I'm just in my little cave here. But I want to just say, I would say thank you to everybody who ever, every director that ever hired me, mostly, of course, to Elton John, who, because of Elton, Elton kind of gave me everything, gave me so much, and it meant so much to me personally and to my career. So cheers.
I just wanted to say a big thank you to all the fans out there who have been enjoying the Rock of the Westies album. It's 50 years, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. But 50 years ago, I had the pleasure of making some guitar contributions to the Elton John project, the Rock of the Westies album, and it seems to have stood the test of time, for which I'm eternally grateful. So thank you once again for all of your support and interest in these things. And it's just a blessing and an honor to have been part of a musical project that has apparently gone down in history?
Well, I'm indebted to all the fans, especially the ones we've had for 50, 60 years, which is remarkable to think that there are still people around who remembered when we were actually doing this. I'm very grateful to the fans for embracing what we were doing, which was trying a really chancy thing. I mean, I told Elton when we were having the conversation, when he told me that he wanted to replace Dee and Nigel, I mean, I didn't believe, I was in disbelief. I was like, why would you do that? We've just had the first album of all time to go straight to #1 and you want to change the band? I said, that's probably not great business. But this is what he wanted to do. And he asked me if I would stay and help him put together the new band. And I said, yeah, because I adore Elton. He's one of my dearest friends and has been since we've known each other. We still talk regularly and I adore him. So I think I'd tell the fans that all the stuff that we've been through all these years, I'm just very grateful to everybody for embracing us, trying something new and staying with us, all these years. Because we've been really in the trenches doing music. Sure, it's for ourselves, but it's mainly for the fans and people who want to hear this kind of stuff that we've been doing. So I'm just grateful for everybody for buying the music and coming to the concerts over the years and being so loyal and so generous to us. I'm very grateful for that.